I want to start with a little story. So, it is September 4th, 2012. I'm standing in front of a large building, my school. And I enter it, pushing aside heavy, windowless steel doors. And inside, I am greeted by a room overcrowded with students and monitored by 2 security guards and an armed police officer. One of them yells, "All metal off!" And the sound of belt buckles and clinging metal fills the room. I'm ordered to take off my clear plastic backpack and place it on a conveyor belt, which leads to an X-ray machine. And I then have to walk through a metal detector. There are no beeps, so I pick up my bag and I enter an old, broken down, overcrowded auditorium where I'm forced to wait for about 20 minutes until security says that it's okay for students to enter the hallway. That is how I entered school every single day for the past 4 years. But when I entered school on that September 4th, something was different. Instead of the typical first day of school routine that we all have to endure, there's a lot of talk going on about a strike. And not just any strike, but a teacher strike. And not just any teachers, but our teachers. And I have to admit that at first I was a bit skeptical. I didn't think that our teachers would go out on strike. I believe that labor strikes were a thing of the past, things that were written about on the torn pages of our American history textbooks. But as the week proceeded, I realized that my teachers were serious the more I heard about it on the news. And the following Monday, I saw my teachers do what very few students have ever seen their teachers do: go on strike. I knew this was history in the making. There we go. I knew this was history in the making. So I, like thousands of other students across the city, joined our teachers in solidarity. Every school in my neighborhood, in fact, just about every single school in the entire city, was surrounded by teachers in red shirts chanting, "We want better schools." And when I heard them say that, I remembered the process in which I went to school every day, and I realized that I too had been wanting a better school for a very long time. You see, for me, the teacher strike was as much about the students as it was about the teachers. It was about having to attend overcrowded classrooms with no heating or air conditioner. It was about schools with no libraries, no computers, no resources, and no hope. It was about students and teachers standing together as one and saying, "We have had enough." But after the teacher strike, I realized that not much mention was made about the students, and this really upset me because I felt that my contributions and my energy had been marginalized. So I wanted to make a change. And I started to talk to many of my teachers about this, and one of the many teachers that I spoke to was Mr. Lamb, who was my US history teacher when I was a sophomore. And being in an overcrowded school, even the teachers have to switch classrooms in between passing periods. So every day, after my 4th period class, I would meet with Mr. Lamb in the middle of a crowded hallway, and we would talk for about 1 minute. And although it may not seem like a lot, these 1-minute conversations that we had every single day ended up transforming my life as a student, because before I knew about it, I was networking with students and teachers across the city, as well as education activists throughout the country. So I networked for months, and I realized that I was not alone, and continued to talk to people. And finally, in February of 2013, I was invited to a meeting. And in this meeting, there are dozens of students from all of these different schools, and I have to admit, it felt a little strange because students in Chicago don't normally find themselves mixed in with other students from different schools because of how segregated we are. But as we spoke, we realized that we had much more in common than we did in differences, and we were all there for the common purpose of wanting to have our voices heard. So we continued to meet week after week. And finally, about 3 weeks later, in March of 2013, the mayor of Chicago and the CEO of Chicago Public Schools announced that over 100 schools would have to close in some of Chicago's most impoverished communities. And right away, we knew that this would affect thousands of students, and therefore, our voices cannot be silent. We organized a citywide student-led coalition called the Chicago Students Organizing to Save Our Schools. But of course, being inexperienced organizers, we had to turn to many others for help, and among those were our teachers. Our teachers provided us with transportation and meeting spaces in different schools all across the city. And in these schools, we, as students, started talking about how we can promote our voices, how we can be recognized, and we started to sort of philosophize, I guess we could call it that. And we came to a conclusion that if teachers had the right to protest and because of bad conditions, then students should also have the right to protest because of bad conditions and/or injustice. And when we started talking about things like this, something incredible happened. Instead of our teachers telling us what to do, they sort of went into the back of the class and let us do all the talking. That is, we were still in a traditional classroom, but instead of the students listening to the teachers like we normally would, it was the teachers who were now listening to the students. That is, the roles had reversed. And because of this reversal, because we were allowed to become independent, critical thinkers, we were able to gain something that absolutely cannot be taught, and that is leadership. So now, we had all of these students who really wanted to make a change, and also felt totally empowered to do so. You can only imagine what we did next. We organized and we fought back. We held actions that ranged from having press conferences at CPS headquarters and hand-delivering giant letters like that one right there to the mayor of Chicago to present him with our demands as well as solutions. We even held a boycott of a state-mandated exam to emphasize the fact that students are not just test scores. Yes. We even engaged in civil disobedience to protest the fact that students in closing schools would now have to cross numerous gang territories in some of Chicago's most violent neighborhoods just to get an education. And we even held a second boycott as part of a 3-day citywide march in protest of the closures. What we did in Chicago last spring was something that had rarely been done in the history of our city. We had united students in a way that was truly unique. Our efforts and our strive for activism gained attention from, we made headlines in Chicago newspapers, we made national news, and even gained attention from international journalists. But despite our efforts and despite all of our hard work and dedication, 50 schools were still closed in some of Chicago's most impoverished communities. 50 schools. Thousands of students were affected. And as a result, many of us felt defeated, including myself. We felt like we had not done enough for the students of Chicago, and we felt like we had not done enough to save our schools. But after a reevaluation, after some time passed, we looked at the positive things that we had done. And what we had done was we had united the students of Chicago in a way that had never been done before. We had gotten the support of families, teachers, community members, activists in a way that was truly unique and inspiring. We realized that all of this did not mean defeat. Rather, this meant that we would have to continue to organize and to amplify our voices so that we could be recognized and we could be heard. And that is why the students of Chicago have now organized a citywide, student-led Chicago Student Union. Thank you. An organization that is dedicated to representing the students of Chicago, to amplifying student voices, to fighting for and promoting student rights, as well as setting a stage for education activism when we find it necessary. I believe that an empowered youth is critical in a healthy democracy, and I believe that the youth has the power to carve a path into progress. So, I want to finish by saying 3 things. The first is that there are absolutely no limits in the way that a teacher can use their voice beyond the classroom to inspire a student. I believe that the perfect example of this is the Chicago Teachers Union strike and how they inspired me to become an activist. But of course, not all teachers go on strike, and that's okay, because sometimes all it takes is having a 1-minute conversation every single day like I did with Mr. Lamb, and I don't think that's too much to ask for. Number 2 is that the purpose of education and the purpose of being a student is not merely to absorb facts and to take tests on them later. Rather, it is to grow intellectually and to use that knowledge to help shape the world around you. And in the same sense, the purpose of a teacher is not merely to instruct students and to test them. Rather, it is to nurture their development and excite their natural curiosity to learn so that they may emerge as catalysts and define the world that they live in. And finally, I want to emphasize that even though we are students and we are very young, we are also very capable. But not many people seem to recognize this. And this has to change. We need a change. And when I say we need a change, I mean we need a revolution. Not a revolution of guns or violence, but rather a revolution of new ideas and ways of thinking. A revolution of youth empowerment and student leadership. So to the students and to the teachers of the world, I say one thing: let the revolution begin.